Well, good evening, and welcome to a slow chat. Ask me anything. And this is a special Battleground Melbourne. I forgot the name of my own documentary for a second there. A special Battleground Melbourne edition of an Ask Me Anything. So get into the comments on Facebook, on YouTube. I can see them both. If you've got questions for me or questions about the documentary, things you'd like to know, look, maybe you're just curious. If you've never been involved in a documentary or a film or anything like that before, and you're just curious about how things work, or if you've got really serious questions about what's in the doco or how it's going to be released or whatever, it's all fair game. And yeah, you guys just jump in, ask me the questions, and we will get started as soon as I start to get some questions. Now, it is, of course, November the 11th, the 11th of the 11th, and we remember today the sacrifices that were made by so many people to give us the freedoms that we are so cheaply throwing away. We saw the Prime Minister today next to Premier Daniel Andrews in some really hilarious photographs. They do not like each other. That was gold. But of course, they're all standing up there, lest we forget, lest we forget. Well, they've already forgotten. And look, Scott Morrison may be less bad than Daniel Andrews, but he's not one of the good guys. He's definitely forgotten, locking down borders, making prisoners out of his own citizens in this country, pushing mandatory vaccination, even though he can't actually mandate it as the federal government, clearly making it very clear to the states that it was his will, that he wanted it done. He's not one of the good guys here, but nevertheless, they hate each other's guts, which at least is a good thing, I guess. Keep our enemies divided amongst themselves. Can't be a bad thing. But we remember today that, I was born here in the 1980s, and with the possible exception of the 1970s, I would argue that was probably the best decade to be born, and Australia was the best country to be born in. And that was not by dumb luck. Yes, we are the lucky country. Yes, we have skated through relatively easily compared to many other countries. But it was actually also, though, the product of very hard work. And we stood on the shoulders of some great men and some great women over the last century before that time came. So we honor them. We remember them. We are grateful for them. And I can't bring myself to say, lest we forget. I just can't, because I think it's very clear that we have forgotten. So instead, I say, let us remember. Let us remember and rediscover what it was that they fought for and why they fought for it. Okay, and on that lovely, happy note, this is my weapon of choice for tonight. I always get asked. So this is a genuine contender for my favorite cigar of all time. This is the Oliva V Milanio. So the Oliva V series is the Oliva Premium series. The V series is already their premium. The Milanio is made out of hand-picked tobacco, hand-selected tobacco. So it's the premium of the premium. This particular Vitola here was the winner of, so this Vitola being the word for shape. This particular shape here was the winner of Cigar of the Year as voted by Cigar Aficionado in, I think it was 2014. And it remains to this day one of my absolute all-time favorite cigars. So I'm kind of rewarding myself a little bit tonight. I'm giving myself a little bit of a treat and enjoying that. You can probably hear in my voice and in my tone, I don't have as much energy as usual. It's been a big freaking fortnight. The last fortnight for me has been massive, but this, I knew I was getting myself into that. That's not a complaint. Just to be clear, of course, it was always going to be massive, and the next month is going to continue to be massive. It's not going to get any easier going forward until this documentary is delivered. But you know what? I'm okay with that. I volunteered. I volunteered for this job. I put my hand up and said, hey, guys, if you fund it, I'll make it. And you guys funded it. You funded it in style. And so now it is my responsibility and my pleasure to make it. So you may have seen either on my Instagram, YouTube, Telegram, or Facebook today. I think I put it up on all four in the end. A little bit of a sneak peek. Tanya, one of the people that we interviewed for the documentary, and it's not even a minute long. It's just 40, 45 seconds long, but it's just to give you guys a little bit of a sense of what the documentary is going to look like, some of the things that are being said. And obviously that's nothing like the finished product. It's always a bit nerve-wracking as a creative. It's always a little bit nerve-wracking showing unfinished work to other people, because you're never quite sure, are they going to get it? Are they going to see what this is going to be when it's finished, or are they going to get hung up on what's wrong with it right now? And thankfully, you all proved very, very clearly that you can see what it's becoming, and I'm grateful for that. So I'll continue to share more of those sorts of things in coming days, coming weeks, all the way up to the launch on December the 20th. So thank you for your really great feedback on that. And there's going to be a lot more of those. I tell you what, there were so many powerful moments. I was in tears At times, I had people that I was interviewing in tears. At times, we were laughing at times and having a great old time. And it is my pleasure to bring all of what happened inside that studio and deliver it to your screens on the 20th of December. So, without further ado, I'm going to scroll through. I'm going to have a look for questions and the questions that I may have missed. And then I'm going to light up and get started. Okay. How are you marketing it, especially to the people that really need to see it? This is a great question. And this is something that is occupying an enormous amount of my brain space at the moment because making a doco, making a film, there is a very real process to it, and I've been privileged enough to learn that process over the years. So if you've only ever known me as a political commentator, that's fine. But my background is film. My background is television, film, and I ended up basically my bread and butter was corporate video for about 8 years. So I have written, directed, produced TV commercials and corporate videos and a couple of short films and a few other bits and bobs over the years. And there is a very real process to it. So once you get started and once you just follow that process, it just got to sort of, yes, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of hours, but you just follow the process, just trust the process. So now that process is very much underway, I am thinking a lot about the marketing side of things. And it's a really tricky one because on the one hand, like just sort of to put yourself inside my head for a moment, I've had over 1,000 people now, and thank you to everyone that responded to the call out today to try and get over 1,000 people. We've done that. Fantastic. Thank you so much. I've had over 1,000 people now financially support the project. How do I prove to them that it was worth it? The temptation is to go for views. I'm just going to go for the maximum number of views that I can possibly get. And if I got 1 million views, that'd look pretty good. If I got 10 million views, that'd look amazing. If I got 100 million views, well, no one can argue with the value, right? But in some senses, just going for views would lead me down a marketing pathway where I'm not focused on getting the documentary in front of the people that actually need to see it. We don't necessarily need every single person on the planet to see this documentary. We need 6.5 million Victorians to watch this documentary. That's actually really who the target market is. And making sure that it reaches them, and it will, of course, flow around the world. It will, of course, get viewed in lots of other places. But this is where it gets tricky. So I have a little bit of marketing budget now because donations continue to come in, and the donations coming in now are all going towards marketing budget. But it's tricky because the cheapest marketing you can do is going to be something like YouTube ads, Facebook ads, these sorts of things. I know with Facebook, I can rack up a lot of views relatively cheaply. Ironically, I can't right now because my page is banned from advertising. Ugh. So I may actually end up creating a brand new page just for the documentary, just so that it's not restricted and it can advertise. But anyway, I'll cross that bridge when I get there. But it would be very easy and very tempting for me just to go, you know what, I'm just going to throw the budget at ad campaigns on YouTube and Facebook and get lots of views. And it would look great. The metrics would look fantastic. And I could target those campaigns into Australia and so forth. I could sort of do all the right things. Obviously, I'm not going to, under no circumstances am I going to just sort of piss the money away. But there is this temptation, just go for the views. It'll make you look good. But the truth is, we and the people that gave me the budget to make this documentary deserve to have this viewed by the right people where it has the potential to make a difference in Victoria. And that means things like poster campaigns. So you've driven around Melbourne, you see the posters on bridge underpasses, beside train stations, whatever. You see these posters up all over the place. Getting those posters put up, it's not super expensive, but in comparison to a marketing campaign online, it's kind of expensive compared to what you could do with the money just online. But it's targeted now. And now it's reaching people that are they're not in our echo chamber on social media. And all social media is designed to divide us up into echo chambers. They're in some other echo chamber entirely. But if we put the right poster up there and they're walking past and they're having a look, oh, I wonder when the bands are coming back. I wonder who's playing, next year. Are we going to see whoever come back and play at Rod Laver Arena or whatever? They're looking at these posters wondering, oh, who's playing at the local pub in a couple of weeks' time. And they come across this poster that says Battleground Melbourne. or a poster that doesn't even say Battleground Melbourne. It might just say he risked everything or she risked everything. And you've seen the first one of these with David Limber. It came out yesterday. And this is online only at the moment, but we are hoping to get it into the physical world. So I would have to spend thousands of dollars out of my marketing budget to make that happen, to get those posters printed, distributed. There are companies that manage this stuff and they kind of have their own turf. And if you just walk in there and start putting up posters over what they view as their areas, well, then, they'll quickly just paper over them again. But if you pay them to put them up, then they'll make sure that they stay there and they get seen for a good little while. So there's kind of this, it's almost like a turf war that goes on with those sorts of poster companies. But I have to make a decision. Do I allocate a couple of $1,000s worth of marketing budget to something like that, where I will never be able to show you the clicks? The views that we get through that campaign will not be traceable to that campaign. There's no KPI that I can put in front of you and say, look, I met the KPI out of this piece of marketing budget. But it's much more likely to bring in viewers who would otherwise never have seen it, and who the importance of impacting them might actually be much more significant than if I'd spent the money within my own echo chamber online. So it's a great question, and I don't have a cut and dried and definitive answer for you. There is going to be a lot of online marketing because of the value. You get a lot of bang for your buck when you market online. So of course there's going to be a fair bit of that. But I'm hopeful, and we're not quite there yet. The budget's not quite there yet, but I'm hopeful of getting to the point that we can justify doing a poster-based campaign on the streets of Melbourne. I think it's a very Melbourne way to advertise a documentary about Melbourne, and I think it will reach a lot of the people that we need to be reaching. Someone made a really good point to me. This is someone not on my Facebook page, someone that I know, made a really good point to me that there are a lot of people on the left of politics that hate Daniel Andrews, but they feel like he's their least bad option right now for a range of reasons. And getting them to watch this doco actually has the potential to have a much bigger effect than getting yet another libertarian to watch the video, right? If we can get a significant chunk of Daniel Andrews' base to stop supporting him, to withdraw their support because they watch this doco and go, yeah, actually, sure, the protesters are nut jobs and they want grandma to die and whatever else, but what Daniel's done is not okay either, right? If we can just get them to that point, then that has the potential to really shake up his support base and really make a difference in this fight. So this is the question that I have to ask and I have to answer. And some of that's going to depend on how well this tease marketing goes. So the posters are coming out. You'll see a new poster every second day. You're going to see more of these sorts of little videos like the Tanya video that I did today. The more broadly they get shared, the more effective they are at reaching people and gathering an audience and building that momentum and building that excitement for the documentary. The less money I have to spend online, and the more money I can justify spending on some of these riskier, harder to quantify types of campaigns that have a better chance of reaching the people that we really need to reach. So that's what's going on in my head. I'm sorry, there's no definitive answer, but that's what's going on in my head. And these are the things that I have to think about as we go forward. I did mention it just a minute ago, Shelley. What did I think of Scotty from Marketing and Dictator down at the Shrine of Remembrance? It looked like a divorced couple being forced to sit in the same courtroom. It was hilarious. Next week's Tats Lotto numbers, I'm sorry, if I knew those, I would not be telling you. I mean, I love you, but I wouldn't be telling you. I love my family more. Have I had any more hassle from the Gestapo or secret police making the doco? At this moment in time, no, I haven't. This cigar starts with a really narrow end. It sort of starts narrower than the full gauge, and that just means you have to nurse it a little bit as that gauge slowly widens. Once it's all the way out and it's up to its full width, it should become a bit easier and require less of my attention. But just right now, it requires a little bit. No, I haven't had any more trouble. And I'm trying to read the tea leaves. I'm trying to understand what's going on with the way that protests are now being facilitated. Because technically, they're still breaching the Cho's orders as best as I can guess. There are still restrictions on gathering sizes, and as best as I can guess, the gathering size limits are being breached by these protests. And I would expect that Daniel Andrews would be very happy to have his police cracking down on these protests and making sure they didn't build momentum, because they are building momentum. We had 20, maybe 25,000 people on the weekend. So there's one of two possibilities, and I don't know which one's true, so I'll mention them both. We saw a little while ago Victoria Police come forward and basically say, we need a way to facilitate protest. We need to stop, we need to put away the rubber bullets and facilitate protest. And that made the news. The fact that they did it publicly, they did it in front of the news, tells you that it was a PR exercise. Now, it doesn't mean it was only a PR exercise, right? I'm not saying they're being cynical and I don't mean it. I mean that in addition to whatever sincerity may have been there, they were also managing the PR. And they are very aware that the people are watching and are very sick of the way that they've been behaving. So option number one is that the police have basically told Dan, we're not doing this anymore. And regardless of what happens with the chose orders, we're not pulling out the rubber bullets and so forth anymore. That's possible. I don't know if that's true. The other possibility is that Daniel Andrews himself has basically said, hey, back off while I ram through my permanent pandemic powers, while I give myself my enabling act. I don't really want vision of people being beaten to death in the streets to be going around the world while I'm trying to get this piece of legislation through. How about we all just go a little bit quiet, let them have their fun while I get my legislation through, and then we'll be good. I don't know which one of those two possibilities is true. I've no way of knowing. All I know is that our response in either case is basically the same. We need to make hay while the sun shines and have such large numbers on the streets that even if Daniel Andrews does turn around and go, right, it's time to crack down again, the police just look at it and go, what, on 50,000 people? You're dreaming. It's not going to happen. And that this becomes a window of opportunity where Daniel Andrews actually loses control of the situation, even if it is a plan on his part, even if he's backed off and the police have backed off because he told them to. We can still leverage that. We can still capitalize on that. So in either case, I think our response needs to be the same. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. Have I had any more hassle from them? No, I haven't. I like what I'm seeing on the streets of Melbourne right now. Okay. When is it being released? Where and what format will it be available? Is it purely an online doco? Thanks, Gary. So the target date is 20th of December. We are currently, as things stand right now, we are on track for that date. We have not fallen behind. The big test, though, was not the filming. The filming ran one day over schedule. That's fine. And it was never going to run much over schedule, right? But just by the nature of what it is, it was never going to go massively over schedule. The risky part is actually the editing. And it's the next week that's going to tell me, can we pull off an edit? And I mean a good edit. Can we do this justice in the short amount of time that we have and with the relatively small budget that we have in film terms? Okay, it's a lot of money. No disrespect, it's a lot of money that you guys have entrusted me with, but it's in film terms, it's not a big budget. So I now have to balance, you know that thing. There's the triangle of what you can get in an artistic world, or really in anything. There's good quality, there's fast, and there's cheap, and you can pick two. Right? So you can have it cheap and fast, but it won't be good quality, right? You can have it fast and good quality, but it won't be cheap, etc. Right? So the budget's good, but I'm having to watch it. It's not cheap, but I'm having to watch the budget. The timelines are insane. Okay. Trying to deliver a documentary in this amount of time, pretty ridiculous. So I have to be fast. I've got no choice. I have to be budget conscious. But I'm also going to hold myself to a very high standard of quality, and I can't let that drop too much. And I'm not going to sit there and go, oh, well, it is what it is. I haven't got enough time to do it properly, or I don't have enough budget to do it properly. That is not an acceptable way to approach a project like this. So this next week is going to be a huge test. I have a lot of confidence in my team. I've got an editor who is fantastic, who unfortunately is going to be another person who's going to end up going unnamed. He's going to end up being anonymous in the credits. Because he works deep within the arts industry, the arts world in Melbourne, which is an incredibly intolerant world. As much as they preach love and acceptance and everything else, they're incredibly intolerant. And if people found out that he was involved in this, then he would lose a lot of his contracts. So this is the test. The next week, the next 7 days is the test for him. So 20th of December is the answer to your first question. Your where and what format? There is definitely it is going to end up in wide release. So by wide, I mean every single online platform: Facebook, YouTube, Telegram, Rumble, blah, 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 all of them, right? It's going to end up in very, very wide release. with the intention of just reaching as many people as we possibly can. However, I am currently debating whether there is value in a narrow release strategy for about a week. And it wouldn't be behind a paywall. It wouldn't be a paid narrow release, but it would be potentially something like teaming up with someone like Rumble, where they're trying to attract new viewers. A documentary like this is a pretty attractive proposition for bringing new people to their platform. And in return, they would have to push me out so that they show me and they promote me to lots of people who are already on their platform. So it's a quid pro quo. They put this documentary in front of their existing viewers, and through the marketing budget and everything that we're doing, I bring a bunch of new people to their platform. There's a potential quid pro quo there that may be really beneficial to the documentary and mean that the documentary reaches an enormous number of people that it would otherwise not have reached, or I would have had to pay marketing budget to reach. But in the end, not in the end, the reality is this is a documentary that is not a commercial documentary. I'm not trying to get paid by platforms to view it. I'm not trying to get money from Amazon or what have you. It's been funded by people who have crowdfunded it, and that means I have a responsibility to attract as many people to watch it as possible. So it will be free. It may be exclusive to a single platform for a short period of time before it then goes wide and becomes freely available on every platform. And I am trying to get discussions underway, and I have the right channels in place, but there's a certain way that these conversations happen. Trying to have a conversation with a major streaming service to try and get them to pick it up. They won't pay me for it, but they may very well put it onto their catalog of documentaries for no money either way. And it just goes on there and it becomes available there, which would be a nice thing. But honestly, that's not where the big viewers are. The big viewers are in the online space. And ultimately, I would love to see if I can get it shown on something like SBS Vice. I'd love for it to be broadcast in Australia at some point in time. Whether that actually happens or not, of course, remains to be seen. All right. How will I be marketing the doco? I've kind of talked a bit about that already. Not doco related, but I did say ask me anything. Early democracies did not rely on political parties to function. Could this ever work again for the modern nation state? It's a good question. And political parties weren't really envisaged when, for example, the US Constitution was written. And I believe even the Australian Constitution, they weren't really envisaging political parties in the sense that they exist today. Political parties are a natural progression. It's not an inherently evil thing. It is a natural progression. So pre-political parties, everyone is effectively an independent. But if you're campaigning as an independent and everyone's an independent, well, people want to know who's going to be the prime minister, who's going to be the treasurer, who's going to be the defense minister, who's going to have these various roles. And if you're just a bunch of independents, and then once you're in, you all vote and amongst each other and have a big bun fight about which one of you gets to be the prime minister and which one of you gets to be these different roles, I can see how that would be disadvantageous. And therefore the politicians coming forward saying, hey, we've already grouped up. And if you vote for all of us and we get in, then this person's going to be the prime minister and that person's going to be the treasurer, and we're going to run things in this way. I can see how that would give a real advantage, a campaign trail advantage to the people that sort of worked in that way. The disadvantage, of course, is that, and we see this with the Labor Party, we see this with what's coming out with IBAC. These people work for the party. They don't work for the people. They're not representatives of the people. They are representatives of the party first and foremost. And this is the natural next step in that same progression. And that's where we are now. Could I see it working without political parties? Yes, I could. Do I think it would be better? I don't think it would last very long. I think we would revert back to political parties pretty quickly. I think the more practical real world solution is the unfortunate process of continuously having to reinvent the political parties that are there and bring in new ones and kill off old ones. The Democrats, the Democratic Party in Australia was created to keep the bastards honest, did some good things, and then ultimately fell into a hole of its own making. The Democratic Labor Party trying to hold the Labor Party accountable, a splinter group from the Labor Party. We see this constant sort of invention and reinvention of politics, and it's very easy to forget how young the Liberal Party is. There are people who were alive today, who are still alive now, and were alive when the Liberal Party was founded. It's very easy to sit here and go, oh, well, it's always been these two. They're just the big two and there's nothing anyone else can do about it. Well, no, no, the Liberal Party did not exist. It was brought into existence, and it became one of the big two from nothing. It started with nothing. And there is absolutely no reason by the time my children are my age, there is no reason why Labor and Liberal parties should still be the big two, or why there would be just a big two. Many European countries quite routinely have minority governments. And I think this is probably where we need to be heading, where there is no party that has enough people voted in to create government in their own right. They're always having to negotiate with minor parties in order to form government. And I think that might be where we're more likely to head. So could we get rid of political parties? Maybe, but it wouldn't last long. Do we need to get rid of political parties? I don't think so. We just have to accept this unfortunate reality of this ongoing work to reinvent our political process and to keep the bastards honest, to just keep holding them accountable. And it's our turn. It's our turn to have to do that. Yep, I agree with you, Patricia. It made me sick seeing Dictator Dan lay down flowers on Remembrance Day. My pa would be rolling over in his grave. Yeah, 100%. Okay. Vaping is healthier for me. Yes, I know, but it doesn't taste as nice. I don't like all those sickly sweet vape juice flavors. It does nothing for me. I quite like these. Thank you. Yeah, so there was a doctor who's been raided, and I haven't posted about it because I haven't been across it. I'm buried in the doco, so I'm sorry, but my page is not going to be the most reliable page for breaking news and that sort of stuff for the foreseeable future. Other people do a better job of that than me. But there is a doctor who got raided, and all of his client information, etc., was just taken away. And apparently, they didn't even go through the proper process of signing for all the things they were taking. They just walked out with a bunch of stuff. No real accountability. So, yes, unfortunately, they're looking for people to make an example out of, and they found him. So, look, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do a follow-up on him. I will be watching other people's pages, Avi and Rukshan and others, to try and understand what's happening there, just the same as you. Where do I think Australia will be at this time next year? Yeah, tricky one. There's a lot of variables there. I'm sick and tired of people saying, oh, this next election is the big one. You know, we have to win this election. If we don't win this election, it's all over. I've heard that for every single election my entire life. But I can't help but feel like it's kind of true for the coming election. So maybe I'm falling into the same trap, or maybe it really is different this time. I don't know. You be the judge. But the next federal election is a really tricky one, because Scott Morrison has been worse than useless. He's been a human rights violator in his own right. He has completely devalued Australian citizenship and made the Australian passport worthless. He's made us an international laughingstock. He has empowered and emboldened our state premiers to be the absolute asses that they have been. He is complicit in this whole thing. He's been a part of it. He wants to jet set around the world, making promises about carbon emissions reductions and all sorts of stuff like that, and just play nice and play the game and be liked by all of those people rather than actually doing what's right for us. So I have no desire to see Scott Morrison get re-elected. I have absolutely no desire to ever see an Anthony Albanese, or really anyone in the Labor Party, get their hands on power. Can you imagine if, what was his name? Labor candidate at the last election wanted to go full socialist on us. His name escapes me. Can you imagine if he had won, what he would have taken this as the opportunity to do? How much more extreme would the economic measures have been? Would we have seen this taken as an opportunity to introduce a universal basic income, to essentially entrench much deeper social welfare and socialism, and even higher levels of spending and money printing? Given the philosophical basis that the Labor Party come from, you can only imagine it would be that much worse. So I look at an election like the federal election coming up in somewhere around about March to May of next year, most likely. And whilst it is impossible for me to get excited about someone like Scott Morrison being returned as Prime Minister, because he just doesn't deserve it, I still look at it and go, yeah, but we can't let the other guys win. So here's what I would hope to happen there. And this does relate to your question, but what I would hope to happen there is that we create minority governments at a federal level. I don't think it's reasonable to think that all of a sudden UAP or Liberal Democrats or One Nation or anyone else is going to suddenly be able to create a majority in their own right in order to be able to form government. I don't think that's realistic. But what is quite possible is that we can see these parties snatching more lower house seats. And it's the lower house, which is where the parliament, the government is made up of whoever has the majority in the lower house. So that's not the senators, that's the other guys. So getting senators is great, and that allows minor parties to influence legislation and what passes and what doesn't and that sort of stuff. That's great. But if you want to hold them by the balls, you've got to put them in a situation where they can't form government without negotiating with you. So they don't quite have half of the seats. Let's say Scott Morrison falls short by 2 seats, but the Liberal Democrats hold 3 seats around Australia in the lower house. They've managed to pick up 3 lower house seats. Well, now all of a sudden the Liberal Democrats have a front row seat at the negotiations with Scott Morrison. Scott Morrison wants to be the Prime Minister again, but he can't do it without the help of someone like, let's say in this hypothetical, someone like a Liberal Democrats. Well, how much more influence do they have then over the legislative agenda? They can do what the Greens have done to Labor all these decades. They've held them by the balls and they've forced them to pursue a legislative agenda that they would never have picked in their own right, but they do it because they need the support of the Greens in order to form government. Well, someone like a Liberal Democrats could potentially do the same thing to the LNP at a federal level. And I think that that's feasible. It requires a little bit of luck. It requires a little bit of the stars aligning, but it is feasible. You then come to the Victorian election, which is right about this time next year, almost exactly 12 months away. I really vacillate on this. I do not have a settled theory at all on what we can expect at the next state election. If Daniel Andrews does get returned as the Premier, if he makes it to the election, which is not guaranteed, and then he does actually get voted in, I will be pulling my parachute. Plan B, thump, I'm out of here. All right. That's not to say I'm going to stop fighting, but I'm not going to live in a state where the people want more of him. I'm not going to tie my future to that state. And I've been honest about that. I've been clear about that for months, that I'm working on a plan B and I'm putting that in place. And yeah, there would come a point, hypothetically, there would come a point where I activate that plan B and I get out. However, I think it's very likely that, and especially in Victoria, funnily enough, even though we've been the most socialist state in Australia for decades, we've also now suffered the most at the hands of Daniel Andrews. And I think it's very feasible for the minor parties to pick up enough lower house seats in the Victorian election to create a minority government situation. And that would get really interesting. Can you imagine? You've got Matthew Guy, limp-wristed, flaccid, visionless, so-called leader of the Liberal National Party, not to be confused with the Liberal Democrats. On one side, you've got Daniel Andrews on the other side, and neither of them can form government without negotiating with, let's just, for shits and giggles, let's say, there's 2 lower house Liberal Democratic members, there's one Nation member, there's maybe 2 or 3 United Australia Party / Reignite Democracy members. There's this coalition of, let's say, 7 or 6 or whatever it is, lower house members that have managed to pick up lower house seats in various areas. And that's determined really on the quality of the candidates. The candidates themselves need to have profile in their area in order to win in the lower house from outside the major parties. But under these current circumstances, there are more people than ever before looking for a new political home. And this is an opportunity where something like that is not impossible. And if that were to happen, then those people, that small number of people, the tail can wag the dog. If they depend on you, if you're the kingmaker and you decide who gets to play Premier for the next 3 years, then they have to come to you with their hat in hand and say, well, what do you want in return for supporting me and making me the Premier? What would I have to do for you? And if those people are the right people, then they can set the legislative agenda for the government going forward. So that's, honestly, I think that's about as good as it's going to get. There is the other variable of whether Daniel Andrews makes it to the next election. There's again, I vacillate. I could argue it either way. It's really, these things are incredibly difficult to predict. All I know is what I've said before: his fall will come relatively suddenly. He will be 100% in charge, in control, no signs of trouble, and then a week later he'll be gone. When it happens, it's going to happen fast, but I've no idea if it's going to happen between now and when the election in Victoria actually is. Can I just say, though, without wanting to be too pessimistic, we were already in trouble before COVID came along. We're spending well beyond our means. We are creating all sorts of inflationary pressures that are now playing out and it becoming visible in a lot of different ways. We've now got supply chain impacts as a result of the COVID restrictions and various other things. And so what that means is we've got a lot of money flying around because the government's been printing it and handing it out like confetti. There's a lot of cash flying around, chasing a very small number of goods because there's been supply chain interruptions. And what does that lead to? Inflation. It's a classic inflationary setup. So Australia was already in trouble. Our levels of middle-class welfare, et cetera, were already unsustainable. And then you add this on top. Even if we have a good political outcome out of all of this and we can actually start to get our governments to start moving in a better direction, we've still got a mountain to climb just to get ourselves out of the hole that we're in right now. So I think there's a lot of work ahead. Regardless of what happens with these elections, we've got some serious work ahead of us. We have been living large off the credit card for a couple of decades now. And the time to pay the bill is now, because people, modern monetary theory says, oh, we can just keep doing this forever. Yes, in theory you can, but that inflation is never going to come back into check. Once you lose control of it, it's gone. You end up with Venezuela, you end up with Zimbabwe, you end up with the Weimar Republic, people with wheelbarrows of cash. That's where that goes. And it's a fantasy to think that we're somehow immune from that result just because we're Australia. It's not magic. So where are we going to be at this time next year? I think inflation is going to be higher than what it is right now. I think things are going to be more divided than they've ever been at any other election time before. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because division, all it simply means is there are people actually willing to fight. There are people actually willing to stand up. So division is not automatically a bad thing necessarily. And I think it's going to get really interesting. Yeah, this is an interesting one, AJ. I talked for a little bit too long. Let me just touch this up. This is an interesting one. So people have been asked, like legal people have been asked, does this permanent pandemic powers bill give Daniel Andrews the power to suspend elections? And the answer is not directly, no, right? It does not have a clause or a provision in there that says, hey, you can suspend elections. But that's also not really the answer to the question. It doesn't have to be explicit. It can be implicit. He can play with words and find a way to make it happen. So I've been giving this some thought. I'm not a lawyer, and I will make this very clear disclaimer. These are just my thoughts as a non-lawyer, as I look at it. Could he play a game like declaring an election to be a public event and therefore using his powers saying only vaccinated people are allowed to attend this public event? That seems much more likely to me than actually not having elections. Tyrants love having elections because it gives them a veneer of legitimacy. It makes them look like they're legitimate. And it helps them to shut up their critics. They love elections. They just don't like free or fair ones. So I wouldn't expect him to try and shut down the election. I would expect him to potentially try and play some games where he forces unvaccinated people to postal vote and potentially makes that a difficult thing to accomplish through any one of a number of different techniques. There'd be those sorts of games that I would expect to be played. Our electoral system is not as broken as the US. I do not believe that we would be able to, or that they would be able to achieve something like what we saw, without doubt, attempted. I don't think any honest reading of the evidence around the last election with Donald Trump would lead you to conclude that there wasn't some interesting things going on, an attempt at some interesting things. Whether it changed the outcome of the election, of course, I don't know. There's good reasons to think that maybe it did, but I don't know. But I don't think that things that extreme can really be done here and gotten away with here in Victoria. Our system is a little bit more robust than that. Having said that, Daniel Andrews is not someone who's going to play fair. We've seen this again with IBAC. He doesn't feel the need to play fair and to do things the right way. And if he feels that he's under threat and his election chances are less than what he would like them to be, nothing's impossible in terms of what he might do. So this is another reason why we need to be incredibly vigilant and incredibly vocal. We have a window of opportunity right now, literally in the next month, to build momentum that becomes unstoppable, where Daniel Andrews doesn't make it to the next election, right? Where his own party tear him down because they realize that he's leading them into oblivion. 10,000 people on the streets doesn't do that. 50,000 people on the streets gets close, double what we just had on the weekend. If we could double that, that's starting to make a statement. 100,000 or more people on the streets, and all the other Labor backbenchers are going to start looking at Daniel Andrews going, we're going to get annihilated at the next election, and I'm going to lose my job. They don't care about losing government necessarily. The backbenchers don't care if Daniel Andrews is no longer the Premier, as long as they don't get voted out of their seat. So the leverage on them is to make them believe that they lose their seat. And if we can convince them of that, then Daniel Andrews' leadership comes under threat, because they don't want to be led into oblivion. They're happy to be led into a loss if that's what their fate is, but not a loss so big that they lose their seat. They want to keep their cushy job. So, yeah, will there be another election? There will be. Will it be free and fair? Mostly, probably, but maybe not. Will Daniel Andrews make it there? That's kind of up to us. And it's up to what we do over the next month, in my opinion. Do I expect much backlash? Before I got arrested the first time, I recorded a video to be released in the event of my arrest and incarceration. So not if I was arrested, but if I was given bail conditions that were completely unreasonable and I chose to do what Monica Smith did. That video was never necessary because in the end, their bail conditions on me were very reasonable, and I never felt the need to release that video. I was back home the same day, literally a couple of hours later. So that video went unused. I did feel the need to update that video while I was on set. And I felt the need to update it to cover not only if I'm arrested, but if I am missing and if I turn up dead. Do I think that's going to happen? No, I think it's a vanishingly small chance, but it's a non-zero chance. It's happened to other documentary makers before who've been saying things broadly similar about people who are, quite frankly, broadly similar to Daniel Andrews in various other parts of the world. And just because it's never happened here in Australia that I know of, doesn't give me the luxury of assuming that it can't happen here. If Daniel Andrews is the man that I believe him to be, and I called him out in March 2020, and everything that's followed suit since indicates to me that I've got a pretty good gauge on the man, then such a video is very unlikely to be needed, but it's a non-zero chance that it might be needed. So am I expecting backlash? I'm expecting backlash for sure. But I've been getting that for 12 years. I've been, you can't be a political commentator and not get backlash. Backlash is neither here nor there. Do I expect it to get potentially dangerous? No, I don't expect that. But I am putting in place contingencies because I certainly can't rule it out. What kind of stogie? This is an Oliva V Melanio box pressed. This is the Vitola that won the Cigar of the Year in 2014. Would I smoke with Arnold Schwarzenegger a stogie? Of course I would. I would smoke a stogie with anyone. So why wouldn't I smoke with him? Yeah, this is the problem right here. So angry that there is not millions protesting. The government has become way too big and needs to be downsized. Yeah. I was sitting there last year, the very first protest, April 25th, 2020, that I spoke at down in Trafalgar, organized by a local Trafalgar woman there. 70 people. Okay. It's only the first one. That's all right. Fast forward a number of months, a few other things happened, and then finally, 5th of September 2020, people came together in larger numbers at the shrine. I think, don't remember if it was that shrine protest or a following shrine protest. We ended up with about 4,000 people by my estimate. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is less than 0.1%, not 1%, less than 0.1% of Melbourne's population. There's less than 1 out of every 1,000 Melburnians here. And given all we'd seen even at that point in time, that seemed like a ridiculously small number. You get to 25,000 people, 0.5%. It's good, but it's still only a 0.5%. 1 out of every 200 people in this city, I'm not even counting people that drive in from the country, but 1 out of every 200 people in this city has actually felt the need to get off their ass and show up and do something. This is a big problem. Now, time is helping us with this problem, and Daniel Andrews is helping us with this problem because he just keeps pushing. He's so stupid and he's so egocentric that he doesn't see the problem, and he thinks he can just keep on trucking, keep on pushing. And our message is getting out there. So mainstream media have treated us very differently in the last week to how they've treated us previously. When the cops change tactics, I can't help but feel the media change tactics as well. Momentum is on our side. We are building. And with a bit more time and a bit more perseverance, I think we'll get the numbers that we need. But less than 100,000 is not really enough. Once we get to 100,000, that's now we're starting to talk. And we're the closest we've ever been. You know, we've had 25,000. We need another 75,000 to show up. For every one person that showed up, we need them to bring 3 friends. And at that point, all of a sudden, we might have the numbers that can actually really make a difference. Do I have a plan B for the release of the doco? He can't stop the release of a doco. He can try. The internet doesn't work that way. So it's going to get released. You know, I've got a plan in place where the data is copied and is being held in multiple different places in multiple different parts of Melbourne. The working files are being updated regularly. He can raid me. He can raid other people. It's not going to stop. It might delay things, but it's not going to stop it. Contingencies are in place to make sure that all gets handled. What I am having to do at the moment is write multiple endings because I don't know what's going to happen with this legislation. I don't know what's going to happen with the protest movement going forward. So last week I had to do all of my interviews, not actually knowing how this documentary ends. It's literally, you know, I'm going to find out the ending at roughly the same time you do. You know, probably pretty close to release date. It's going to be one of those documentaries where it ends and then up comes a screen at the end giving you an update on what has happened from when they filmed to when they actually released it. And that's unfortunately just the reality of working under the circumstances that I'm working under. So I have a couple of different endings. One of them is based on Markian, the violinist, and the beautiful rendition of the Australian National Anthem that he did at a protest a few weeks ago. An alternate ending will be based on what I will be doing at a protest on the 20th of this month, Saturday the 20th. That is a secondary ending, and then there's a tertiary ending, a third option, depending on certain things. So I'm having to just put in place contingencies because I'm literally trying to make a documentary about the future. So I'm trying to make a documentary about things that haven't happened yet. Yeah, Rebecca, it's going to be really heavy on a lot of the other footage. So lots of Rukshan's footage. I've got permission to use Rukshan's footage, Avi's footage, goodness, I've lost his name. Marty Focker's footage. Discernible Matt Wong's given me permission to use his stuff, etc. So there's a lot of that. Plus, there's my own stuff that I've filmed over the last 20 months, news footage, press conferences, etc. There's an enormous amount of content out there. It's almost a problem. There's so much content. The time-consuming thing is going through it all and finding the right bits. But no, it's not just interviews at all. It's driven by the interviews. The interviews tell the story, but there's a lot of other stuff. Okay. Aaron, yeah, Aaron, nice to see you here, mate. I haven't laughed and cried so much in the one day than I did on filming day. Yeah, you were a legend, or you are a legend, and yeah, filming with you was awesome. So yeah, 100%. It went both ways, mate. Good to see you. You must be frazzled. Not frazzled. I'm tired, and I suspect that you can hear it. I feel like I'm coming across as tired, so I apologize for that. But yeah, tired, tired. Um, Topher, no need to dangle a carrot. The awake are ready for this doco. Trust me, you're a champ. Well, I appreciate that. But ultimately, we're not trying to reach the awake. I want to encourage the awake. Yes, it is for those who have already become aware of what's going on. But ultimately, we need to make sure that we reach the people that are on the fence or yeah. Okay, so is the documentary only about the reaction to COVID-19 in Victoria? Does it cover all of Australia? It is really focused on Victoria and 90%, 95% Melbourne. This we are really focusing right in on this. The story is relevant to the entire world. Everyone needs to learn the lessons that we have learnt the hard way over the last 20 months. But the story is of Victoria and primarily of Melbourne. Will I be speaking on Saturday? Not this Saturday, but if you ask me about the following Saturday, I've done all that and I still ride a Honda. I don't even ride the thing. It sits there unregistered. I haven't had that registered since before I was married. We made the decision to be a one-car family to try and keep our costs, living expenses low. And now 7 years of marriage in, we're still a one-car family, 2 kids, 2 businesses, all the rest of it. We're still making do with just the one car. And I've just not been able to financially justify getting that back on the road at any point in time. It is a very, very nice bike, though. I will defend Hondas. It's a very nice bike. Yeah, Patricia, I'm the same. Don't underestimate the views of those overseas. They're protesting on our behalf makes our politicians feel like the whole world is against them. Yes, and certainly, boy, was I thrilled to see that stuff unfolding, and that will make a brief appearance in the documentary as well. Yes, that's true, and there is a lot of international interest in this doco, so I think it is going to go very well overseas as well as in Australia. But ultimately, I need to be taking aim fairly and squarely at Daniel Andrews as the source, as the head of the problems. He's not the only one. There are other people that need to be held accountable, but it flowed from him. And I need to be taking aim squarely at him and making sure that he is recognized by other Victorians as the source of these problems. Thank you, Melissa. I'm not quite sure how it all works in terms of the sort of the areas and that sort of stuff. So I'm still feeling that out. But I do want to do a poster campaign. Rail. What about designing a flyer we can print out to hand out a letterbox drop? That's a good thought. And if I had an army of people that I knew would hit the streets and get that done and letterbox drop, then that would be interesting as a bit of a different way of advertising. But small stickers put up on lamp posts and bus stops and these sorts of things can be good as well. And then, of course, the big posters, if I can make sure that we navigate the politics of that correctly and we don't just have them torn down the following day by people that see that as their wall. Samuel. Yeah. I'm not a popular man in certain circles, and I'm perfectly okay with that. Because, my dad was a great man, or is a great man, and has so many amazing traits. But one of his flaws that he does acknowledge, I'm not saying anything that he doesn't say about himself. One of his flaws was that he wanted to be liked. He wanted to be nice. And I was raised that way. I was raised to be nice to everybody, get along with everybody. And I've been slowly growing out of that and getting really comfortable with standing for what I believe is right, doing the things that work for me, and not really caring. It's not that I don't care, like, no, I don't care. No. Probably the better expression is I don't mind. I don't mind if you disagree with me. I don't mind if you think I'm wrong. I don't mind if you think I'm an idiot. That's okay by me. We don't have to walk away having agreed with each other in the end. And that was a journey for me. I wasn't raised that way. So I'm very comfortable with people trying to put me in the loony bin and calling me names and accusing me of different things. It for the most part, I mean, no one's perfect, and sometimes I let people get under my skin a lot more than I should, but I can usually then brush it aside after not too long. But by and large, I'm standing for what I believe to be right, and I know that I'm going to get an awful lot of blowback over that, and I don't mind. I just don't mind. It's okay. That's fine. That'll be whatever it is. Ba, 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 ba. Yeah, this is an interesting question from Michael. And David Limbrick himself raised the same concern with me, because he doesn't see himself as having really actually risked everything. And so he asked me the same question. He's like, oh, like, I know that's a tagline of the film. So it comes from the tagline of the film: the fall of the world's most livable city through the eyes of those that risked everything to save it. That's the tagline. And for people like Monica, for people like Rukshan, for people like myself, I think it's fair to say that we've risked a hell of a lot. Everything is a big word, obviously, but we've risked a hell of a lot. I'm up on charges. I'm standing in front of a judge on the 19th of January with, at least in theory, potentially decades of prison time as one of the possible outcomes. Now, it's not going to come to that, but that's what they've done to me. I've got cops showing up at my house. My son, literally just in the car, he was just obviously thinking about stuff, and he just says to me in the car earlier today, he says, "Dad, are you going to go to jail?" And I had to answer honestly. I said, "Well, I don't think so. But you know what? If I do, you'll still be able to visit me." And that was good enough for him. He was happy with that. For David Limbrick, it hasn't been as personal. It hasn't been as intense. He's been somewhat protected by his status as an MP. But what he's done has not been without risk. He would say, because he said to me, he would say that he has not risked as much as others. So he would actually be largely on the same page as you. But I made the judgment call, and he accepted that judgment call and allowed me to go ahead with the campaign on the basis of consistency between the posters. And so we've got 6 people: David, myself, Monica, Crystal, Avi, and Rukshan, right? And I think it's pretty fair to say that we've all risked a hell of a lot. And for the sake of consistency, he allowed me to put the same tagline onto his that we put on the others. But he shares your concern. So it's a valid question. Smoke ring, please. I wish I could do them on demand. I really can't. It just happens sometimes. See, this is the question, Simon. Not everyone is looking at posters on a poll. Take Brunswick Street, Fitzroy. Lots of posters, mostly Greens and Labor, not your target market. That last bit, that's what I'm debating. Because as someone made the point to me yesterday, I mentioned it earlier in the chat, and possibly before you jumped in, I don't know, Simon. The left, the Labor Party, the Greens, and Daniel Andrews' support base is made up of different factions. And some of them hate his guts. They back him because they don't feel like they've got a better alternative right now, but some of them hate his guts. And getting through to a small number of the right people is more important than getting through to an enormous number of the wrong people. And so I think there's a case to be made that actually, and I lived in Fitzroy for 4 years, so I know that area very well. I know the way those people think. I used to refer to it as living behind enemy lines. That was how I referred to my 4 years there. I think that there is a case to be made that actually investing some energy into reaching the wrong people, as much as it is more expensive and is harder to do and will reach smaller numbers of people, reaching a small number of those people who are on the other side completely has the potential to have a pretty big impact. So Beige Shirt is saying, Victoria, please, this affects all Victorians, needs to get the word out. So 3 of my interviewees are from outside of Metro, out of 23. So obviously it is Melbourne centric, but we are certainly discussing things like border bubbles, things like the impact on rural communities, the Ring of Steel, the impact for the Ring of Steel inside Melbourne, but also outside Melbourne, people trying to get their children to medical appointments through the Ring of Steel, that sort of stuff definitely comes up. So we are covering the whole of Victoria. But the reality is, if you just do it on a population basis, you've got 2 million people outside of Metro and 4.5 million people in Metro. And Metro is where it has been at its most intense. That's where the protests have happened. That's where the violence has happened. And that's where the harshest lockdowns have been. So I don't feel I'm justified in having Melbourne be the main focus, but Victoria is certainly not neglected. Yeah, this is not a bad idea, Aaron. A QR code linking to a trailer of the doco and then place it over check-in QR codes. I don't know. I'd be asking anyone to place it over the check-in QR codes. There's probably some obscure law about, I don't know, vandalizing public health stuff or something like that. But to put QR code stickers up all over the place and just Battleground Melbourne and then a QR code where at bus stops and tram stops and everything else, that might be a great way to actually get more people watching the trailer. I'm expecting to be able to release a trailer about a week before the doco launches. Trailers are an art form in themselves, and we're not going to be able to make that trailer until the doco is coming together pretty nicely. So there's probably only going to be about a week there where we'll have a trailer. Yeah, so this is something that comes up a bit, and not something that I've specifically researched, but it's worth mentioning. There is an argument, and I don't necessarily agree with it, to be clear, but there is an argument to say that once someone has served their jail term, then their crimes shouldn't follow them for the rest of their life, right? If you think that someone hasn't done enough jail time for their crime, and therefore they need to be, sort of punished for the rest of their life, even once they're out of prison, then maybe their prison term should have been longer until they're actually punished sufficiently. So people who sort of want to continue someone's punishment after the end of prison, I have some concerns around that whole sort of philosophy. However, the reality is our prison terms are so short and our sentences are so lenient that I tend to agree that most of the time, and especially in the case of child abuse and so forth, the punishment does not fit the crime. And I can certainly understand why people are therefore saying, well, okay, he's done his time, not enough, but he's done his time and he's out. We need to keep an eye on him. We need to know if he's moved into the area. We need to know this sort of stuff. A 90-year suppression order reeks of, and I need to be careful how I say this. I'm not suggesting for a moment that Howard himself was guilty of anything, but it reeks of people being in his ear and asking him to do them a favor who had something to hide. That's what that reeks of. And if you've looked into this sort of stuff at all, which I'm sure, Jessica, you have, and many others have, you would know some of the rumors and some of the question marks around some current and a number of former politicians. Was that what that was about? Is that why he introduced that? I don't know. But certainly to have those sorts of questions hanging over the heads of sitting politicians and former politicians, and to have the government actively trying to make sure that we can't get answers to those questions, that's not a good look. And I'm not okay with that. But at the same time, that's not a fight I'm going to take up just at the minute. Zero Bugden, is it possible to upload the full interviews? Six months or so after. Yes, it's possible. I'm not going to do the full interviews as in question and answer. And the reason for that's very simple. This particular documentary, I already knew what I needed these people to say. And I wasn't putting words in their mouth. This was based on conversations I'd had with them previously. I had phone conversations with these people. I knew what their stories were, at least to a certain degree, and I knew where their stories fit within my documentary. So I asked them leading questions in order to get the answers that I knew were going to be useful for the doco. They were not sit down and have an interview for the sake of creating a good interview. They weren't like my 50-to-1 interviews. If you've seen that project where I was interviewing climate scientists and politicians and journalists, etc., on the topic of the Julia Gillard's not a carbon tax, I was sitting down with them and having interviews that were designed to be released as interviews. These were done differently because of the timelines involved. I didn't have the luxury of doing normal interviews and then the time it takes to cut those up and turn them into a finished product. I don't have that time. So the interviews themselves in full aren't going to be that great. But there is a lot of fantastic content in the interviews that isn't going to make the final cut, because I've got about 20 hours of interviews and the documentary is an hour and a half long. So there's a lot of stuff that is good that's going to hit the cutting room floor. So I'm actually going to be releasing a lot more. So you saw today the video with Tanya. I'm going to be releasing a lot more of those sorts of things, just short snippets, some of the absolute highlights from these interviews between now and the launch date. After launch, I do hope to go back and do some longer form content out of those interviews where just I can include more of it, but it won't be the interviews in full. They will need to be edited just because they actually won't make a lot of sense because of the way I did them. And I did them single-mindedly for the doco with no other considerations in mind. They're not great interviews in their own right, and I need to sort of fix that if I'm going to put them up. Can we buy your posters? I don't see why not. Carly, who is on my marketing team, can print up to a certain size. I'm not sure what her maximum size is. But okay. Here we go. Gary. Oh, how would that work? Let me throw a thought bubble at you that's literally only just occurred to me. Who would want a poster, okay, in its own right? And that would just be done at whatever it costs us plus a little bit to then go into the marketing budget. And would anyone be interested in significantly more expensive, but actually signed posters? I don't know whether they'd be signed by the individual that's on the poster you're getting. So if you've got a Rukshan poster, maybe signed by Rukshan and the proceeds go to supporting him, something like that. Or perhaps signed by everyone, all 6 of the people that are actually on the posters, maybe signing them all. Just throw comments in here and tell me, would you even be interested in any kind of poster? You've seen one of them, the David Limbrick one. They're all in a similar vein. They're all constructed in the same way. But there's 6 different people, 6 different faces, and the backgrounds for each have been tailored for each of those individuals and their kind of stories and their role in all of this. If that would interest you, throw some comments in, and maybe I'll spend a bit of time thinking about how we can make that work. Demir, you're not wrong. Daniel Andrews is not left. He is a fascist. He is. Where I would disagree with you is to think that the left are not fascists. Communists think that fascists are the opposite of them. They are very close bedfellows. So you can be both of the left and a fascist at the same time. Craig, an interview with Dr. Mark Hobart, read the event. So he's the doctor I mentioned earlier, had his medical records being stolen. The set that we filmed in has already been torn down. I could only rent the studio for a certain amount of time. So that wall that we built specially, it's already gone. It doesn't exist anymore. And stylistically speaking, and especially because this is designed to get an international audience, we need the style to hold together. And I can't now just append another interview in that doesn't match all of the other ones that we did. Stylistically, people are going to be confused about who is this guy, where does he fit. So we can talk about what happened to him, and I can use any content that is online. So, the live streams from when it happened, anything that he says online and any other interviews, I can weave all of that in while still being stylistically faithful to the design of the documentary, but I can't interview him myself directly and have that work in. The wall is gone, and stylistically speaking, I would be breaking the rules of the universe. When you make a doco, when you make a film, there are rules within that world. This is kind of wanky filmmaker talk, but everyone that I have interviewed is on that same backdrop. I will be presented on a different backdrop, and all other content comes from the internet. It's people's phone footage, interviews that were done online, these sorts of things. I can make all of that work, but I can't do a direct interview with someone on a different background. I'd be breaking the rules of the universe that I've created with this doco. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but unfortunately, that's just the reality of making a good doco. That window has passed. I don't know which news you're referring to, the news which Morgan covered yesterday, and the RDA. Didn't hear about that. Sorry, I'm in my own little bubble. The real world is like this parallel universe that I really don't see much of at the moment, to be quite honest. What filmmakers are influencing my style or approach with this piece? I hate the analogy because I don't like his work and I don't like the man. But there is an unfortunate reality that stylistically there is a certain amount of Michael Moore in this. And I say that because Michael Moore goes into his documentaries very, very prejudiced, and he wants to make a very specific point. There are sort of 2 types of documentaries. There's the types of documentaries where it's an exploration, and the documentary maker themselves doesn't necessarily know what they're saying. They're just exploring a subject, and they'll arrive at whatever conclusion they arrive at. Now, most of the time when a documentary presents itself that way, it's actually a lie. The documentary maker did go in prejudiced and with a point and knowing exactly what they wanted to say. But every now and again, people present a documentary that way, and it's actually true. They were really genuinely exploring. Someone like Michael Moore goes in prejudiced to make a point and is at least Everyone knows that that's true, right? He's not trying to pretend otherwise. And that's what this documentary is. I'm going in prejudiced. I have a particular point of view on this. I'm making that very clear, even on the posters. This is through the eyes of the people that risked everything to save Melbourne. I'm not trying to present a balanced, here's what the police said, here's what the premier said. But well, I mean, I am. I'm showing what they said, but I'm showing the stuff that they said that's horrific and should never have been acceptable. So I'm prejudiced, but I'm being very open and upfront about the fact that this is where I'm coming from. This is the story that I'm telling. Someone challenged me on that earlier today on social media and said, "Oh, are you going to be showing their side?" And I said, "Well, the mainstream media have been showing their side for 20 months. The premier has no trouble getting his message out there. The media are doing a great job of repeating it endlessly. This is our reply. I don't feel the need for this documentary to be balanced in its own right. This is setting the record straight from all of the imbalanced media that has gone out over the last 20 months. So in a way, I, through gritted teeth, have to draw the analogy between myself and Michael Moore, at least in that regard. But I would say probably the best indication of what to expect would actually be one of my own previous pieces of work, where it's a video called "Do You Want to Know Where Your Food Comes From?" And I interviewed a number of farmers up around the Murray-Darling Basin, irrigators specifically. And it was 5 interviews, if my memory serves me correctly, maybe 6, because I interviewed a pastor up there as well on the mental health side of things. And I wove those interviews together to tell a story. And that is what this documentary is. It's 23 interviews woven together to tell a story. This has the benefit of an enormous amount of cutaway footage. So all of the, protest footage and interviews that have happened online and all sorts of other stuff that I can bring in to bring more energy and more life. You're not just going to be looking at someone's head the whole time. There are going to be these people talking, but then there's an awful lot of other footage that I can then bring in to edit in and tell the story. But fundamentally, from a structural point of view, it is essentially the same process. I am using a bunch of other people's words and combining them with each other to then tell a single story through the mouths of multiple people. That's really what I'm doing. So if you're wanting to see where the direction is going, probably have a look at Do You Want to Know Where Your Food Comes From? Which is on my Facebook page and on my YouTube, all that sort of stuff. Posters would be awesome. Cool. Simon Gill, that's a big old cigar. It's half the size it used to be. But yes, this is one of my favorites. Zoe, I might end up feeling like a real idiot here. Have I spoken about Dan having to leave his own speaking event because of the protests? When did that happen? If that's happened in the last week, I've probably missed it because actually the last fortnight, I've just been completely buried. If it happened before that, well, I should know about it, but no, I actually don't. So if you can give me some more info on what happened there, that'd be great. Hopefully the police worked out it was bad PR for them. I think there are certainly members within the police and senior members within the police who are well aware of how bad this has been for them, but they haven't had the guts to actually stand up. Hopefully, we're reaching a point where they are actually beginning to stand up and at least not being willing to continue the worst of the violence. Please design a downloadable flyer for us to print out. Everything will help. Okay. I'll put that to Carly. Carly is my graphic designer, photographer, but also working on the marketing side of things and the marketing strategy. And we'll see where that fits. That could very well be a doable thing. But part of me says we'd be better off getting a bunch professionally printed and distributing them rather than having people print them out at home. I'll have that chat with Carly. We'll see. I hope so, Simon. I hope that's true. Dan Deming has no police support anymore. Certainly there are individual officers that have stood up, and I've got 2 of them in the documentary, Crystal Mitchell and Craig Backman, 2 Victorian police officers that have stood up and gone very public in their opposition. And without question, their actions have shifted the mood within the police force, and they've emboldened other police officers within the police force to begin to take a bit more of a stand internally than what they had the courage to do before those guys came out. So we owe them a great deal of gratitude for that. In the end, evil doesn't happen because everyone involved is evil. Evil happens because the people in charge are evil and the people underneath them are obedient. And for as long as the police choose to be obedient, they remain part of the problem. Uh, Yeah, they were a buzz, Stephen. The long days you did with filming with Carly Rukshan and all the crew must have been uh, quite a bit of a buzz. Well worth the time and the effort, and I reckon your wife and kids are so proud of your dedication. I'm incredibly lucky to be married to a woman that supports what I do. And as I talk to other people where this issue, the mandatory vaccines and I stand with Dan and etc., has actually split their marriage, I count myself so incredibly lucky, ridiculously lucky that I married the woman I did, and that I've got her wholehearted support. In many ways, she's more extreme than I am, and I'm having to tell her to kind of, just calm down a little bit, which is nice. I'm not having to drag her along, and she's not resenting what I do and the risks that I take. She's up for it. She's every bit as up for it as I am. The filming days were long, so they were tiring. They were also really heavy, really, really heavy. And it was nice in those moments where we laughed, and we didn't laugh with everyone that we interviewed, but probably 4 or 5 different people that we interviewed. We were able to have a laugh along the way. And boy, that was amazing. Luckily, just by pure fluke, we ended up with Avi on the last day. And Avi, love him or hate him, like he is well aware of how polarizing he is, and he's got no problem with that. But I've got to say, I'd never really met him properly before. We've crossed paths at protests. He came to the photo shoot. We've crossed paths a few times, but this is the closest I've ever come to actually meeting him. And what I will say is that he's very, very funny when he wants to be. And we had a couple of really good laughs. And look, I really like him. If he was one of those people who wasn't aware of how polarizing he is, I would find him an absolute jerk. But because he's aware and he plays into it and he owns it, I find it really endearing, and I couldn't help but really warm to him. So we had a great time, and that was a nice way to finish the last day's filming. Was actually with someone who was just lots of energy, very, very funny, very, very self-depreciating, and just that left us on a real high after 6 really long and at times very, very heavy days. Well, maybe have a think about coming to the protest on Saturday the 20th, Dion. Just have a think. Okay, so something must have happened that I don't know about, because this is the second one referring to Dan running away from protesters or ending meetings due to protesters. So someone update me, please. I've missed that completely. Yeah, he does have a lot of support, Zena. He's got a lot of people that support him, but we don't even need a majority. This is the funny thing about politics. We don't need a majority. We just need at least 100,000 people on the streets, because any politician worth his salt knows that that represents at least 1 million voters. And they will know that they're losing voters. These aren't just the people on the other side of politics. They know that in amongst the protesters, there's a lot of people who've never voted for anyone other than Labor, and now they will never vote for them again. We don't need a majority to win this. We don't need a majority to have the Labor Party tear Daniel Andrews down. We just need the backbenchers to be sitting there going, this is turning into a revolt, and we are not going to keep our seats at the next election. They're not worried about whether Daniel Andrews stays in power at the next election. They're worried about whether they keep their individual seat at the next election. That's what we need to put into their minds, is the fear that they are going to lose their seats. And we don't need a majority to do that. We just need a few people to, we just need a few of those backbenchers to come to the conclusion that they're not going to win their seat if Daniel Andrews is still in power at the next election, and then big things can happen. This is a great question, and it is something that's just playing in the back of my mind. For those of you that don't know, I had an attempt at getting into the entertainment industry some years ago. I studied screen acting for a year, full time. I wrote and directed a number of sort of creative projects. I had a short film, which I've actually got lined up to play for you when we kind of stop for a loo break in a couple of minutes. I did a short film that made the finals in Tropfest. I wanted to be in that world, and I very quickly realized that I wasn't welcome in that world, because I wasn't willing to agree with everybody else's politics, and I wasn't willing just to keep my mouth shut, which a lot of people in my shoes do. and I wasn't going to be that guy. So I gave up on those ambitions to ever be in the entertainment industry and to ever be in that world. Those skills are coming in handy now, by the way, and all of the learnings are coming in very, very handy now. But one of the thoughts that's in the back of my mind, if I can be selfish about this for a second, is to say, well, if this documentary goes really well and I play my cards right, then I could do another one. And if that's successful, and not necessarily even crowdfund it, if this documentary goes really well, I might be able to find people that want to commercially fund the next documentary. So I don't have to ask people for money. I can actually get it on commercial terms and sell it and turn a profit on it. And then that opens up the opportunity for another doco. And this could actually be opening up an entirely new direction for me of feature-length documentaries going forward. And Lord knows there's a lot of topics that I could go back and cover. I could go back to climate change, a topic that I covered in short format interviews and short videos some years ago. There's an entire video. If you look at the forbidden history of unpopular people, the 12-minute or so video that I did about Ignaz Semmelweis and so forth, there's a feature-length documentary there. There's so much more to say on that topic. The forbidden history of terrible taxes, there's a feature-length documentary there. I mean, and plus all the other topics that I haven't touched yet. Not to mention, as you say, what about the whole of Australia in relation to COVID? What about the medical side of COVID? Like at the moment, I'm just talking about the political side of COVID and Daniel Andrews as an opportunist, as a narcissist, trying to gather all the power that he can. There's the medical side of the coronavirus as well. There's so many different angles and so many different topics. And I'm certainly very aware in the back of my mind that if I do a good job with this doco and if I market it correctly and if it gets seen by as many people as I'm aiming for, and I have a number in mind of what I'm aiming for, then yeah, sequels could very much be in the works. What I don't want to be doing is constantly going back to you guys, my audience, and saying, oh, fund this. I'm crowdfunding for this next one. I'm crowdfunding for that one, and spend the next 4 decades of my life basically, surviving off crowdfunding campaigns. I don't enjoy having to ask people for money. But if I do a good enough job with this and I can therefore attract funding on commercial terms where people say, hey, if you make another doco, people are going to want to watch it in the cinemas. I mean, Michael Moore's business model was cinema release. Now, that was before we had all the streaming services that we have now, etc. But if this can be successful enough and I can build a big enough following and a big enough audience, then, I don't know, hypothetically, someone like Amazon might turn around and say, okay, we'll fund your next documentary and we'll have it exclusively on Amazon because we know that that's going to lead to more people signing up to Amazon. And it becomes a commercial arrangement. I'm no longer having to do crowdfunding campaigns. So all of that is in the back of my mind, but honestly, none of that matters unless this documentary is amazing. So my first and primary focus is to deliver and absolutely exceed everyone's expectations, both in the quality of the documentary, the content of the documentary, and also then the marketing of the documentary so that it really does get out there. And if I can successfully pull that off, then yeah, I would say sequels of some nature or other are very, very likely to be in my future. Is it too late to contribute, says Nathan? No, it's not. I'll type in the URL. It is give-send-go/Battleground Melbourne. I'll just type it in here so you can click it. givesendgo.com/Battleground Melbourne. All right, so that should drop in, whether you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook, that should drop in a minute. Now, keep in mind, the budget for production has been raised. I had to basically take what had been raised when I went into production and allocate that out. And so the money that is being raised now, and there is money just continuing to trickle in. And thank you to today. I did repost it to my Facebook page today and said, hey, I want to get to above 1,000 contributors. I want to be able to say more than 1,000 people helped to fund this project. And we've now exceeded that number of 1,000 contributors. So thank you to everybody. So the money now is all about the marketing. It's all about giving me that war chest to be able to do things like poster campaigns, flyer campaigns, some of these things that are a bit more expensive than just purely pushing it out online. But in my opinion, they have the opportunity to actually make the documentary far more effective. And I had that discussion early on. The number of views isn't necessarily the best measure of effectiveness. And I want this to be effective, not just viewed lots of times. And that means reaching people who need to be reached and perhaps a little bit harder to reach than just YouTube ads. Yeah, so that's where any further budget that we raise now, it's all going to the marketing budget. Paolo says even small short films can be 4 times the budget of this doco. Yeah, I've been a producer on TV commercials that had a $500,000 budget, 30 seconds, $500,000 budget. Anyway. Am I including Dan's treason charges in the movie? I need to get more information on that before I can include it. At this point, the plan is not to, just simply because I've got 90 minutes. I'm covering 20 months in 90 minutes. And there, the story is a cautionary tale about how people's apathy allowed a psychopath to take power, and how that can happen anywhere in the world. If it can happen here, it can happen anywhere in the world. And so I've had to cull a lot of things that are in, like, for example, his fall, if it was a fall, doesn't make the cut, doesn't even come up in the documentary. Why? Because it doesn't help me to tell the story about what happened from the point of view of the way that he consolidated power onto himself. There's too much has happened, and an enormous amount just has to get left on the cutting room floor. There just isn't room in a 90-minute documentary to tell all of these details. And I've said for many years, and those of you following me for a while, you'll remember that I've said previously, the art of what I do, all the videos that I do, the art right from day one has been knowing what to leave out. That's actually the art of what I do. People watch my stuff and they go, "Oh, it was so clear. It just made it like I get it now." I'd do videos on the Murray-Darling Basin, and I'd have irrigators saying to me, "I understand that now better than I used to, and I've lived it for 40 years." And that's because I leave out the stuff that isn't actually core to telling the story that needs to be told. So I'm yet to be convinced that that is core to the story that I need to be told, but it is one of the areas that I am looking further into, and I may change my mind on. I hope so, Melissa, because my team are amazing and they deserve an enormous amount of credit. So hopefully, all the anonymous ones will one day be able to be named. I hope so, and I think the politics on this will change, and I think it could be as little as a year away, and they will be able to actually, come out. I mean, imagine, it used to be that people would hide in the closet if they were gay or what have you. Now they hide in the closet if they're anti-Dan Andrews. Yeah, but yes, I really hope they will be able to do that. Can we have a future slow chat regarding Plan B? Brainstorm ways out just in case. I'm getting a lot of requests for more content on Plan B, and obviously I've gone in a different direction, focusing on this documentary, etc. But that is one of the things I want to get back to. Well, that didn't go well. I don't mind ash dropping on me, but that just smashed into a million tiny pieces. So good question here. Are there people that you really need to see it on Rumble? And well, this is the tension. Rumble might, and I'm trying to have this discussion with them, Rumble might do an exclusive release deal where they help to promote it across the Rumble platform. That might be really good for views. But the people who are already on Rumble probably are more likely to already agree with what this documentary is on about. So yes, on that metric of am I reaching the right people, it's debatable. And these are decisions that are basically getting made over the next 3 or 4 weeks. And I need to make some judgment calls. And it's not going to be possible to know for sure what the right course of action is. It's a judgment call. And I have to make that judgment call and then follow through on that and live with the outcomes, whatever they turn out to be. But trust me, a lot of thought and a lot of conversation, a lot of strategizing is going into those sorts of decisions. Cameron says Joe Rogan. If anyone can get me on Joe Rogan's podcast, I would be very, very grateful, because if he not even on his podcast, if he just tweeted about the documentary, just put a link up to it, then that would obviously help enormously. Yeah. Yes, it is sad. Klaus, the cigar is annoying. Well, I was debating, do I go and have a cigar and enjoy my own company for an hour and a half, or do I have a cigar and share that time with you guys? I decided to share that time with you guys. You can go and do whatever you would like to do. Ba-ba-ba-bum. See, this is interesting, AJ. Thank you for the comment, but I'm going to disagree with you a little bit here. He says, it's going to take us 15 to 20 years to teach patriotism to a new generation. People are too brainwashed. They'll never see it the way we do. I'm not sure that patriotism is the answer here. I'm a libertarian, not a conservative. And I believe in free markets. And free markets, in order to function correctly, involve the free movement of people. I'm not a nationalist. I'm not a patriot in that sense. I believe that what we created, what we designed, not what we're living in now, but what we designed as a political system and as a legal system was one of the best that was ever made. It was designed to treat people equally. Now, it doesn't always do that, okay? But it was designed to treat people equally. Our country, our system was designed that someone could come from another country and in their very first, literally having been born somewhere else, they could come and get into politics and potentially end up as the prime minister. You can't do that in the US. In the US, you have to be born in the US in order to be able to become the president. Our system was designed to put everyone on an equal footing before the law and before the political system, regardless of how long they'd been here for. And I think we've seen the success of that over the decades and the century since we were federated. We've seen the success of that. Even before that, we were seeing tremendous success of enormous migrations into Australia of people coming looking for opportunity and working their asses off and making it. I grew up in Preston in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, and Reservoir, the next suburb out, had all the big houses. Back then, we were allowed to call them wogs, and they called themselves wogs. These days, you get banned if you use that word. But it was the Greeks and the Italians, right? And they were in their second generation by the time I was getting to know them. I was meeting the kids. Their parents had emigrated after the Second World War and had worked their asses off, and now they were richer on average than the white guys that had been born in Australia, in that same generation. And that's what this country has allowed so many people to do. So I am patriotic to an idea. And insofar as we stand for that idea, then yes, I'm going to be patriotic. It is very difficult for me to get excited about patriotism as it's, for example, practiced in the US. Rah, rah, America, greatest country on earth. Now we're going to go and bomb these people because they pissed us off. The values being held are what matter to me, not the piece of dirt. And I say that as someone, I love this country, and I love Melbourne especially. I genuinely believe I won the lottery being born here when I did. But I don't know that teaching patriotism is the answer. I think teaching freedom is the answer. Teaching people to value freedom, which is patriotic to the founding, to the design of our system, but it's not necessarily patriotic in the sense that word is used today, if that makes sense. Maybe I'm splitting hairs, but I'm very careful with the word patriotic. I don't disagree, Scott. I don't disagree. UAP should be a concern. Just because they oppose the majors doesn't make them a good alternative. They're a populist party run by a wealthy megalomaniac. They are a populist nationalist party. And historically speaking, that can lead to some really bad places. Now, I don't think anyone in that party wants to go anywhere near those places, but historically speaking, populist nationalist movements can lead to some really, really bad outcomes. Even just something as simple as buy Australian. Okay, look, yeah, I buy Australian, on a regular basis. The T-shirts that are available, they're not made in Australia, but they are printed in Australia, and that was a conscious choice. I have someone in Australia handling all of that, doing all the printing, taking care of the customer service, all that stuff, and that was a conscious choice. But these nationalist kind of movements, what they can tend to want to do is shut down free trade, shut down freedom of movement, which then actually in turn is shutting down the very basis of the prosperity that we've enjoyed. There's a reason why we're one of the most prosperous countries in the world, and it comes back to what I was talking about a second ago, free markets, which includes free movement of people. So I agree that UAP is a concern because of their nationalism and their populism. However, at the same time, this is one of those moments in history where I think we need to say the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The French resistance against the German occupation was full of communists. And early in the resistance and through the middle of the resistance, the Americans were supplying them with weapons and funding and equipment and training and everything else, even though they were communists. Towards the end of the war, they threw them under the bus and they deliberately got them rounded up by the Germans and dobbed them in and so forth, because they were shifting their focus towards fighting the communists. They were already looking at the next war before they even won the Second World War. There's some really awful history there. But there is sometimes a need to say the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And in politics, there is an unfortunate reality. And Scott, I know you know this very well. As much as I hate the lesser of two evils argument, sometimes it's a reality. Incrementalism, picking something, getting to where we're slightly less bad than where we were, is better than no movement at all. And having someone like the UAP holding a number of lower house seats is less bad than having the Greens hold the balance of power, for instance. Mitch, yeah. The question, what could Dan be up to? I think people give Dan too much credit. I don't think he's nearly as crafty as what a lot of people think he is. I think that he largely believes his own BS, believes that he's tremendously popular, and he actually believed it when he tried to bluff and say, oh, there's just a small number of cranky people. I don't even know what they're protesting about, blah, blah, blah. He genuinely thought he was going to get away with that. He genuinely believed that that tactic was going to work. That's when I say the man's not as smart as some people give him credit for. That's what I'm talking about. Like, the man he's as smart as a sack of potatoes. He's highly manipulative. He's incredibly clever in that sense. He's politically astute in that sense. But his ego and his megalomania are definitely getting the better of him. I wouldn't necessarily be lying awake at night worried about what he's going to do next. I have a lot of faith in the people in this movement that whatever he does next, we will respond. I've seen that over the last 20 months. Let's take when he rolled out the anti-terror squad. He literally put an armored vehicle on the street, the special operations group shooting people on site with rubber bullets. He would have been watching that thinking, there's no coming back from that. What are you going to do now, protesters? Well, what did we do? We completely decentralized. The individual industry groups stepped up, nurses, teachers, truckies, and started creating their own socially distanced, mask-wearing protests that even the police, when they were sent on the scene, they couldn't move in the way that they'd been moving in literally a day earlier. On the Wednesday, they were just moving in, guns blazing, shooting at people. They saw these protests and they went, we can't take that approach. They still intimidated them. They still broke them up. They still arrested people. They still did lots of stuff they should not have done. But they had to actually de-escalate their tactics, because the protests, without anyone making any decisions, there's no central leader, there's no central leadership. The protest as a movement all of a sudden pivoted on a dime and changed tactics. And then the police were put on the back foot again. So I'm not that worried about what Daniel Andrews does, because I have a lot of faith in the people involved in this movement, the ones that I've met and the ones that I've never met. I have a lot of faith in the movement as a whole that we will respond. If UAP or One Nation get the votes, do you think things will change? By get the votes, I'm going to assume that you mean to hold the balance of power. My personal preference would be to see the Liberal Democrats in that position, because I think they are actually a principled, freedom-loving party. UAP, One Nation, they have certain areas where their policies are much more freedom-friendly than what we're seeing, and would be the lesser of the available evils as compared to what we've got right now. But then they have other areas, particularly around trade and immigration, etc., where they're the antithesis of freedom. They want to shut down free trade. They want to reduce how much we actually trade with the rest of the world, which inevitably leads to us being poorer and the people we would have traded with also being poorer. International trade, people have this stupid idea that, oh no, we're running a trade deficit with that country. We're giving them more of our money than they're giving us. Let's just stop and think about that for a second. I run a trade deficit with my local supermarket, right? They get a lot more of my money than I get of theirs. I run a trade deficit with my local bottle shop, right? Doesn't matter, because I make my money elsewhere. right? And what matters is overall, are we actually getting wealthier or are we not? That's what actually matters. Looking at the individual lines of where the money's coming and going can very quickly give you a really distorted picture of what's happening. And that's what these parties tend to do. They get obsessed with trade deficit. They get obsessed with, we're spending too much money overseas. Okay, are we getting value in return for that money? Because if we are, then good. There's no problem, right? If we're getting value back in return for that money, commensurate to the money that we're spending, then there is no problem. So some of these parties have the potential to take us down some really bad paths economically, and I wouldn't trust their judgment on many issues. Are they less bad? Yes. Would I rather UAP held the balance of power than the Greens? Yes, of course. Would I rather that the Liberal Democrats held the balance of power instead? 100%. Yes. There you go, Jen. What can the churches do to support the movement? Yeah, I've been disappointed with how churches have approached this. I'm seeing a couple of approaches right now that are less bad than they could be. One approach that I'm seeing is churches holding services with a capacity limit at the lower level, the unvaccinated level, so that they don't have to ask anybody about their vax status, and they're holding multiple services over a day. So each one is capped at that unvaccinated level, so that they never have to turn someone away because they're not vaccinated. Yeah, okay, that's one way to approach it. I'm not going to say that they should do something different. I'm not a pastor of a church, so I'm not going to. I can't really put myself in their shoes. That's one way to do it. Some places are holding their services in their car parks so they can comply with the outdoor limits rather than the indoor ones. There's various strategies like that that I do approve of, in the sense of being less bad than apartheid, less bad than checking people's papers on the way into the church. I mean, how unchristian, how unchristlike is that? And some places are doing it. The number one thing I think churches need to do is be organizing and encouraging their congregation to get politically active. There is this cancerous idea that you can't mix religion and politics, that somehow Christians shouldn't be involved in politics and churches should certainly not be speaking out politically. No, I'm sorry. You don't understand what faith is if you think you can exclude it from the world of politics. Right? We all, our beliefs about God, even atheists, our beliefs about God inform our politics. If you believe that there is no God, that will influence your politics. That will influence where you stand on certain issues. If you believe there is a God, it will affect your politics. It will influence where you stand on certain issues. That's unavoidable. And that's true for every single person, whether they call themselves religious or not. So churches need to stop being shy and start speaking out. I don't disagree, Gary. Labor and Liberals are just crime gangs. I would say governments in general are just crime gangs. People want to get really upset at me from time to time for wanting to play nice. Like, as an example, wanting to play nice with the police, not be antagonistic towards the police. I view it in much the same way as I would view it if I lived in a mafia-run town, right? Do I think it's good that we have standover men demanding protection money from shopkeepers? No, I don't think that's a good thing. But if I was a shopkeeper and they were coming in and saying, hey, give us your money, would I give it to them? There's a good chance I would, for the same reason I pay my taxes to the government. I don't think it's morally right. I don't think they have any right to do what they do, or especially to spend it how they spend it. But yeah, you sometimes you have to make a pragmatic decision around, do I want to live or not? There are fights that you pick and there are fights that you don't. Yeah, the hypocrisy of this is certainly not lost on me, DJBD. I'll let others read that while I give this a little bit of love. All right, there's obviously a lot of conversation happening between you guys in the comments. I'm reading a lot of comments, and I'm like, I don't have context for that because they don't nest for me. They just pop up as individual comments, and obviously you're replying to each other and having chats, which is great. But I'm trying to find the actual questions. Okay, so Pete's videos. This is a question I have been asking myself. Do I think that Liberal and Labor would actually team up and form a coalition if they were under threat from another party? It's a really interesting question, and it's not as far out of the question as some people might like to believe. I was just starting to get a little bit gummy on the back there. There's some tar that sometimes comes out of tobacco as you smoke, and every now and again you just need to re-snip to get rid of that. It's not as far-fetched as some people think, but it is pretty far-fetched. Simply because what it would require is for the leader of the Labor Party or the leader of the Liberal Party to accept being the Deputy Prime Minister behind the other one. And ego is going to be a problem. There's another layer to that problem for the Liberal Party specifically because they have their formal coalition. I'm talking federally here. They have the formal coalition with the Nationals, where the leader of the Liberal Party becomes Prime Minister and the leader of the Nationals Party becomes the Deputy Prime Minister. And that's been the arrangement for a couple of decades now. So then if Liberal want to go into a coalition with Labor, where does that leave the National Party? Do they lose their Deputy Prime Minister spot? And that then creates another layer of problems for them. I think it's far more likely that the Liberal Party would try to work with, let's say, in a perfect world, let's say it's Liberal Democrats. Let's say the Liberal Democrats get 3, 4, 5 lower house seats at the next federal election around Australia. And by dint of circumstance, by pure fluke, that means they hold the balance of power. And that ScoMo can't form a new government without their support. ScoMo is going to work very hard to negotiate with them and to get them to support him and give him supply, give him the job. He's going to work a lot harder on that than he will on trying to form a coalition with the Labor Party. Where I could see that maybe coming into play is in another 2, 3, 4 elections time, as the major parties continue to get the crap beaten out of them by the minor parties. I think we are seeing a shift in Australian politics, and we're probably heading into an era where minority government is going to become the norm, much the way it is in most European countries. Minority government is the norm. I think we're headed in that direction. So something like that is not out of the question, but I think it is probably out of the question for this coming election. I wouldn't be too worried about that happening for that, in my opinion. What do I know? Harry, I appreciate the comment, but I'm going to disagree with you as well. On the issue of preference voting. Preference voting, in my opinion, is actually one of the best aspects of the system that we have as compared to other systems, the French system, the American system. I'll use the same example that I used, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, a month ago. I've lost track of time in another chat that I did. If an election only had 2 people in it, then obviously preference voting wouldn't be needed, right? Whoever gets just over 50% wins. So you've got these 2 people, and let's say one of them's going to get 51%, one of them's going to get 49%. Okay, we've got a clear winner. But then along comes a third candidate. But let's say that third candidate is politically here, right? So you've got one person here, and then there's a third candidate that's politically over here. And they get 10% of the vote. But all of the people that voted for them actually came from the person who was here. They went, oh, 10% over here. Now all of a sudden you've got 10%, you've got 41%, you've got 49%, and now the 49% wins, even though actually 51% would have preferred this guy over that guy. Just 10% of them voted for this guy, right? And that's what happens when it's a one vote, one and done kind of a system. Preferential voting allows that third candidate to run and get his 10% of the vote, but everyone that votes for him says, I want to vote for him, but if he's not going to win, I want my vote to be preference to this person here. And so what you get is the correct outcome. If you look at sort of where these people lie on the political spectrum, the votes flow through to the least bad candidate in the opinion of the people voting. You can end up with a situation, this has happened in America before, where the person that was actually the most popular doesn't win because their vote got split by another person coming in. Think about it in terms of all the minor parties right now. You've got UAP, you've got One Nation, you've got IMOP, you've got Liberal Democrats. They're all different parties with very different policies, but they are, broadly speaking, appealing to a certain spectrum of voters. And that means they're just splitting that vote down into tiny little fragments and ending up with tiny little percentages of the vote. That's a problem. With preferential voting, it's less of a problem. And I've been quite clear what we need to be doing in this coming election cycle for the federal election and this Victorian state election is using preferential voting intelligently. Vote number one, the party that you like the best, the minor party that you like the best. In my case, it's going to be Liberal Democrats. Then I'm going to hold my nose at vote number two for one of the other minor parties that has some policies that I like and some policies that I don't. Someone like a One Nation, okay? Then maybe someone like a UAP, someone like an IMOP, someone like a whomever. And I'm going to make sure that my vote flows through every single one of those parties before it reaches any of the major parties. Now, I've said something previously that was a mistake. I didn't clarify as well as I should have what I was talking about. I've said previously, don't vote for the major parties. Leave them off the ballot. That's true in the Senate. In the Senate, you have to, I think it's 6. I think you have to vote 6 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you can keep going, but you're not obliged to keep going in the upper house, in the Senate, federally. In the lower house, my understanding is you have to fill every single spot. You have to number every single place. So when I said don't vote for the majors, I was talking about the Senate, but I neglected to say that that's what I was talking about. So I apologize for that. Make sure that you read and understand the rules when you go in. And on my understanding is on the lower house ticket, you need to vote for every single one of them. But don't put any of the major parties until you've put every single minor party candidate, even the ones that you don't necessarily like, but they're just less bad. Vote major only after all of the minor parties. And in that way, we can increase the odds of actually, a bit of an upset, a few of these minor parties snatching a couple of lower house seats and snatching a bunch of Senate spots, holding the balance of power in the Senate, which is always a nice thing, but especially if we can pull it off to hold the balance of power in the lower house, that's the real prize. And it's my opinion, Harry, that the preferential voting system is actually going to help us to do that. And it's my opinion that, putting aside practicality for this election, in principle, it is actually a better system, in my opinion. Will my docker have music in it? Yes. I have a composer. They're already working on it. They've been sending me some concepts for what they're working on. We're going for a psychological thriller type of vibe with the score. So a lot of kind of in the more action sequences when we're watching protests and police response, it's very rhythmic. Lots of sort of industrial rhythm kind of timpani. Then in sort of the slower moments, the interview moments, etc., it's much more pensive. A lot of strings, a lot of orchestral kind of sounds through those periods. But yes, the entire film will have a custom soundtrack, a custom score that is being made by an award-winning musician, a professional score writer that I know here in Melbourne. Aaron, if I'm going to drink a beer with a cigar, it's a stout. I always go with a stout. I just find the stout flavors play really, really well. Something like a Moondog, what do they call it? Moondog, something or other. The stout that Moondog make is absolutely fantastic with a cigar. Yep, that's the problem. Yeah, so Scott's basically making the same point that I just made. Preferential voting helps minor parties. First past the post is why the US system is a duopoly. Minor parties in Australia can hold the balance of power at the very least. Yeah. The reason why the Libertarian Party in the US has basically no chance of ever getting anywhere is because everyone looks at them and goes, yeah, but they're the third candidate. And if I vote for them, I've wasted my vote. if the US presidential system had presidential elections had a preferential voting system, and someone could vote for the Libertarian Party and then preference to presumably Republicans, but some would be to Democrats, a lot more people would vote for the Libertarian candidate. They'd go from 3% to maybe 10%, 15%, maybe more, who knows. But for as long as there's this perception, well, they're not going to win, voting for them is a wasted vote, that actually suppresses their votes. And the solution is preferential voting. None of them. You trust none of them. They all blind you with promising so much bullshit. Who do you trust? You don't trust them. And this has been the problem. This has been our mistake. We trusted them. We trusted Daniel Andrews. We believed him when he spoke and he said, this is what we need to do. This has been the mistake that we've made. And this is the lesson that we're learning. You don't trust them. Yeah, don't trust. Just vote minor parties first, 100%. Surprised that Daniel Andrews lasted this long. How do the Labor members sleep at night? I'm not a psychologist, but let me give you my theory on what's happening here. Politics attracts a particularly weak kind of person, a weather vane, the kind of person that's constantly got their finger to the wind. What's public opinion doing today? How can I be popular today? And when you introduce into that mix someone with a single-minded narcissism who believes that they are God's gift to earth and that they deserve power, and they have some psychopathic traits, some ability to manipulate people, which is what I believe Daniel Andrews is and has, then he finds it very easy to bend those people and those personalities to his will and to his way. And a lot of the time they don't even like it, but they go along with it because he's convinced them that this is how they're going to win the next election. This is how they're going to be more popular. They're going to follow me and I will lead you on to success and victory. They might hate his guts, but for as long as they believe that message, they'll fall into line. Someone like Daniel Andrews gets a really tight grip on power. He knows how to work the system in the background. We're seeing a lot of that being uncovered through IBAC. So he's got a lot of control, not just in terms of I'm the premier, therefore I have control. He's got a lot of control in the back room, where the deals are done, where the factional deals are done in the Labor Party. When he crashes down, it's going to be hard, right? When they do turn on him, it's going to be spectacular. However, it takes a lot of guts to be the first one to turn on him. Like, think about the protest movement. You know, to be the first to be heading down there to Trafalgar to the very first protest, I was freaking nervous, right? You don't want to be the first one to step out of line. It sucks to be right early. I've said that before. And for Labor MPs right now, I think a lot of them in the backbench, they're looking at each other going, who's going first? Who's going to have the guts to actually step up and go, no, we're calling it. This is, time's up. You've had your chance. You've screwed it up. We're calling it. And the types of personalities that are attracted to politics, they don't have the guts. They don't have the guts to do it. So, and this is why I keep saying we need to convince them that they're going to lose their seats. Once they realize that they're going to lose their seats individually, not just Daniel Andrews is going to lose power, they are going to lose their seat at the next election. At that point, they realize they have nothing left to lose. And maybe, just maybe, we'll see some of them actually have the guts to do what they should have done a long time ago. But until they believe that they are going to lose their seat, I don't think we're going to see a move on Daniel Andrews. Melinda, I hope that works out very well for you. I am concerned about Queensland in some ways. What they're doing is not necessarily any better than what we've seen down here. But hopefully, when we win down here, that's going to change the direction of Queensland and everywhere else as well, hopefully. IBAC hasn't given us a smoking gun yet, which is frustrating. I agree. It's definitely revealed more cracks. There's definitely pressure there. There's definitely more people seeing Daniel Andrews differently to how they've seen him ever before as a result of IBAC. But we haven't had that smoking gun moment, and that may not come, to be honest. IBAC may not be the bomb that bursts the dam, so to speak, and it all comes crashing down. But it is certainly revealing more cracks. This is exactly right. At the last New South Wales state election, we saw a number of minor parties, particularly the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers and One Nation, made some really big inroads at a state level in the lower house, which is the crucial one. The upper house is important, but the lower house is the crucial one. Unfortunately, we didn't see that translate into the federal election following. But I think if we in this federal election can see minor parties making inroads, certainly in the Senate, but also in the lower house in Victoria, Victorian lower house seats in the federal election, then I think that is probably our best hope of actually getting state Labor backbenchers to start to get nervous. If they see that the federal seat that overlays their state seat flipped to some minor party in the federal election, they're going to be sitting there going, we've got a state election coming up in potentially as little as 7 months from when the federal election is held. Oh crap, I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose this cushy job that I've got and all the perks and all the attention, all the importance that comes with it. So yes, the federal election is actually quite important for winning this fight here in Victoria. Why are we so stupid? I don't know that we're stupid. I think we're lazy. I think we're spoiled. We are the spoiled brats of the world. We've had it so good for so long that we never thought that this could happen to us. And there are still people who are just sure that it couldn't happen to us. Normalcy bias. This is the way it's been all my life. This is the way it's going to be all my life. And they just can't see it. I think it's a lot of laziness, a lot of obedience based on a very skewed sample. The sample of my life has been, I've never had to worry about politics. Politics has been fine. I've never really been hurt by my government. Why would I be fearful or worried that my government's going to hurt me now? Well, that, of course, our lifetimes is such a small sample. You don't have to look very far back in history to see very different outcomes. But most people don't do that. So, yeah, ignorance, laziness, obedience. Stupidity, I guess, is a different way to express that. We needed something like this. We needed something like this to shake us out of that, and that's happening. Gary is saying, my son is in Victoria, plenty of work, but he says something is wrong there and he'll be coming back to Sydney. Something is very wrong here, mate. Something is very wrong here. Emalia replying to somebody else, I agree. I no longer recognize I want to live in Victoria. I'm not going to be on the first plane out of Victoria, but, will I be on the last plane out? I don't know. I mean, if Daniel Andrews makes it to the next election and then wins, I'm going to take that as my cue to get out. There's certainly some parallels between what's happening now and the Kane Kerner era with Labor. Certainly some parallels. The solution, though, this time cannot be to flop back to the Liberals, because Matthew Guy is no Jeff Kennett. Love or hate Jeff Kennett, and I happen to quite like what he did in many ways. We don't have that person in the modern Liberal Party, or certainly not anywhere near the leadership of the modern Victorian Liberal Party. Going back to the Liberals as Premier doesn't fix anything. It may make things slightly less bad, but it's not really going to change anything. We need the minor parties to get the balance of power. That is, to my mind, that is our best hope. Yeah, so this was interesting when this came up recently. I saw it in the news and I haven't been able to follow it up because of the doco and everything else, but Daniel Andrews seemingly fudging the numbers around the state budget. It wouldn't surprise me if that were true at all. But again, this is something I've been reflecting on recently. Tyranny is incredibly boring. This, I think, is part of our problem. The reason why so few people see it is because when you watch a dystopian movie, everything looks dystopian. It's been designed. There's a production designer has made everything. The buildings have a certain look. There's a color grade, green or blue or whatever it might be over the entire thing. the vehicles are different, the way people dress is different, the way people talk is different. They create this dystopian world, which is great for entertainment, but without realizing, and what that's done is train us to think that tyranny doesn't look normal. I learned from my week on the ground in Venezuela, it looks incredibly normal. You walk down the street at a time when there isn't a line to get into the supermarket, and people standing there for hours trying to get butter. You could look around and go, oh yeah, it's all normal. You walk out the front door of your house, it's the same street, it's the same house. There are the same cars, the same people, they're dressed the same way and they talk the same way. Tyranny in real life is actually incredibly mundane. It happens in boring pieces of paper being passed through, Parliament House, and rules and restrictions and arcane sort of stuff. It happens with the budget and foreign exchange laws. Foreign exchange laws is what completely fucked Venezuela. The Venezuelan people, not the Venezuela as a country, it completely destroyed the Venezuelan people. It was a boring foreign exchange law that was brought in around exchanges with the US dollar. It's actually really, really boring. And that's why I think so many people can't see it. It doesn't look like what they've been trained to think it looks like in watching, dystopian movies, etc. Or, even you look back in history, it has a certain look to it. And we don't accept, or we struggle to accept that actually that's just how it looked back then, right? That was normal for them. It looks different to us because we've moved on by 70 years. But for them, that was just how the world looked and how the world was. And it happened quietly in very boring ways until eventually it hit the streets in front of them. And by then it's too late. Tyranny is actually an incredibly boring process. Yeah, there is definitely already a black market. I would say a free market. The black market is actually the free market. One of the things that surprised me when I was in Venezuela was realizing just how broad the uptake of cryptocurrency was, particularly Bitcoin, because they had these foreign exchange laws that stopped them from trading for US dollars. So, and their local currency, the bolivar, was inflating away horrendously. So they fixed that problem by turning to crypto. So even if cash is outlawed, I actually think we're going to be able to continue to have a pretty healthy black market, but we're going to be trading using crypto. Yeah, so Mia commenting on, yep, during the Ceausescu dictatorship, we still had elections. Yep, elections can be held. I don't think Daniel Andrews is going to cancel the election. That would be too obvious. I've kind of already answered this. Do I think there could be a leadership challenge in the big Labor Party? Not until enough backbenchers realize they're going to lose their seats. That's when that becomes a real possibility. Do I think the federal government will step in if the bill passes, like Amanda Stoker hinted at? It's not out of the question, but honestly, a lot of this stuff, the vaccine mandates, etc., they're coming from Scott Morrison. He can't legislate them federally. The Constitution doesn't allow him to do that, but the pressure for them has come from him. So if they were to do that, it would be a matter of politics, not principle. They would be doing it in order to improve their chances of winning the federal election by pitting themselves against the unpopular Daniel Andrews. So even if they did, I wouldn't see it as a huge win. I'd still be very, very wary, and I think we need to follow through and aim for these minority governments that I keep talking about. Um, I, I think the Liberal Party have lost the right to be trusted. They have absolutely lost the right to be trusted, and it's my personal opinion that we cannot allow them to play nice and regain our trust cheaply or easily. The next cycle of elections, we have to make sure that they cannot form government without the help of some of these minor parties. That's the only way to send a message that they're actually going to learn from. Yeah, sorry, Gary. That sucks. I've met Helen a couple of times, and I really like her. She's fiery. She knows what she thinks, and she will give it to you. And as you say, she can go for 2+ hours on a single topic, not because she's a gas bag, but because she actually knows what she's talking about. You know what? I've not asked her to come on a slow chat, but I might touch base with her. We can talk. I might touch base with her and see if she's across what's going on here and whether she would want to. She's back in the UK now. And I don't know whether she's necessarily been keeping up with this stuff. Maybe she has, but that's a good idea. I might have a chat with her. Yeah, this would be nice, Aaron. This is what's needed. I mean, we've seen something like this in Canada. Tens of thousands of police officers basically turning around and going, "No, we're not doing this anymore." Um, we need that to happen here, but police command have been so cowardly and have been so bent to the will of Daniel Andrews that they've kind of set this example of just doing what you're told, doing whatever you're told, and it's fallen to people like Crystal and Craig to actually stand up. Now that they have, I think the mood is shifted. I think we're seeing that in the way the police are behaving right now, but we're not yet seeing them go to that point. But man, that would change things. That would change things very, very quickly if we saw that starting to happen. This is a great point, Nairi. Malia Carr, you're not alone. Good Aussies are working 24/7 to ensure that we have change. Patience is our friend. Also, being proactive. And this last point is key. Surround yourself with a support group of like minded people. Building a community is never a waste of time. Reaching out to people, forging new friendships is never a waste of time. We've all lost friends through this period, and some of us have, they're family members we don't talk to or whatever. Okay. We've all experienced that through this time. But hopefully, and I certainly have, but I hope you have too. And if you haven't, I would suggest you become more proactive about this. We've all found new friends, or we've discovered people that we were acquaintances with, and we go, "I'm your friend now," because we're supporting each other through this time. We've got each other's backs. We're a family through this time. So building a community is never a waste of time, and that's where I think at an individual level, that's where we should be investing our energies, is in community building. Yeah, Rebecca, what do you think is the population percentages of people who disagree with this proposed bill in Victoria? It feels like a small number, but I think it's changing. I was encouraged to hear Tom Elliott on 3AW today spoke out against it. It's still very much a minority. The vast majority of Victorians aren't even aware of it, and that might seem unbelievable. But if you just watch mainstream media and listen to, music on the radio at work and whatever else, well, you're not going to come across this stuff. So there's a lot of people that actually just aren't even aware of it. I was chatting with Carly yesterday, and she was telling me about an experience she had. She's been bullied into being vaccinated. She didn't want to, it wasn't her choice, but she was basically left with no choice. So she's been vaccinated, and as a result, she's now able to go out. And so she was out with some people, and overhearing a conversation where people were bad mouthing the protesters. Oh, these dirty protesters doing whatever. And she just sort of said, they're not actually anti-vaxxers. This is a protest about the pandemic powers, the bill. And they were like, the what? And so she then spent the time and kind of broke it down for them and said, this is what it's actually about. And by the end of that conversation, they were like, oh yeah, okay. I can see why there'd be a bit that that doesn't quite seem right in Victoria. and so it was just ignorance, and the media have been very complicit in this, and this is why they do things like labeling the protests anti-vaxxers and 5G and all that sort of stuff. And this is why earlier this year, I kind of got really fired up and really clear about we had to clean up our messaging. We had to make sure that the messaging on the signs and the messaging from the protest speakers, etc., was really clear, because the media were taking every little opportunity to misrepresent what we were about. And that worked. So there's a lot of people that just don't even know. They don't even know about the problem. But like I said before, we don't need a majority. We don't need a majority. We need 100,000 people on the street. That'll probably be enough to do it. And we could potentially get there in the next month. Leith, I'm very sorry about that, mate. That's a horrible situation. You're not alone. There's a lot of people. Someone that I know who's fighting cancer and is under all kinds of pressure to get the jab, and doesn't want to do it because they know nothing about how this interacts with the immune system, chemotherapy, etc. And there are some serious reasons to be concerned about the effect of these mRNA jabs on people who have certain types of cancer. But they're doing the same thing that they're doing to you, Leith. It's just like, no, sorry, you got to do it. So I'm sorry. It's a horrible situation. There's nothing that I can do to change that except try and change the whole situation. I can't change your situation, but I can help try and change the whole situation. And hopefully that will be soon enough that you don't have to go through with it. But yeah, I'm sorry. How do we infiltrate the mainstream media and get the audiences we need to get to? I'm a minority in my social family life, but mostly a minority. How do we get the mainstream media and personalities on board? They're slowly coming around, bit by bit. It's the Overton window. This has been the problem, and I've talked about this before, so my apologies to those that have heard this before, but the Overton window is a way of expressing the range of acceptable opinions that you're allowed to express in polite company or in public. And the Overton window sort of is this idea of that is the boundary, and you can talk about anything inside that and you'll be okay. If you get too close to the edges of it, some people might not like that. But if you go outside of that window, it's no longer acceptable. And being opposed to mandatory vaccinations was outside of that window for a very long time. But as we've pushed and pushed and pushed, and we've continued to talk about it anyway, despite the media attacks and everything else, slowly more and more people are coming around and realizing what it is that we're actually saying and what it is that we're actually concerned about. The Overton window hasn't quite got to the point yet where it's acceptable in the mainstream media to be opposed to mandatory jabs, but it's getting there. And this is the value of the protest. People have said to me, "Oh, why do you bother protesting? What have you achieved? You haven't achieved anything." Well, this is a war, not a battle. No one thought we were going to show up. I didn't think I was going to go down to Trafalgar on the 25th of April, 2020 and hold one protest and all of a sudden it's done, one and done. It's not how it works. What the protests do, and particularly now that we've cleaned up our messaging this year, the protests are having a slow but significant effect on the Overton window and what is acceptable for people to talk about. So it's persistence that does this. How do we get there? We keep going, because we are getting there bit by bit, piece by piece. Lalia, I'm glad I'm having a positive effect for you. And you're going to love the doco. If you want a nice lift of the spirits, I mean, the doco is going to be heavy. There's a lot of heavy stuff that's happened in the last 20 months, and I can't make a doco about the last 20 months and not include that and acknowledge that. So the doco is going to be heavy in places, but I think you're going to like the ending. Guys, I am fading, and I've just realized we've been going for 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I've had a really long couple of weeks, and I've got a really long month ahead. So I haven't even got through all the comments. I know there's heaps. I'm literally, the comments I'm looking at are still from not even 9 p.m. So there's an hour and 20 minutes, hour and 30 minutes worth of comments that I haven't even looked at yet. So I'm so sorry. I really appreciate it, though. I appreciate everyone watching. I appreciate everyone that has asked questions, and I'm so sorry that it's just not possible for me to actually to get through them. I hope that tonight's been good. It's been good for me, and I've appreciated your company and enjoyed having the chat. I've enjoyed your questions. All I can say is please continue to share the content that I'm putting out. You saw today the first teaser. You saw yesterday the first poster. There's more posters. There's a lot more teasers. They're going to be being drip fed out day by day between now and when the documentary launches. And it's so important. The success of the documentary is going to be helped so much by these teasers if they go far and wide. If they reach a lot of people and make a lot of people aware that this documentary is coming, then that means that when launch day comes, it's a lot easier. It'll just go like wildfire. It'll go through all those people that have come across all the little bits of marketing and then continue to go out from them right around the world is the hope. So the best thing you can do for me right now is just to continue sharing that content. When those things come out, make sure that you're on my Facebook page, my YouTube, my Instagram, my Telegram. Yes, I do have a Telegram now. And just make sure that each time you see these pieces of content, please reshare it, put a comment on it, like it, share it. These are all things that the Facebook algorithm is looking at. And the more people that do that, the more the Facebook algorithm goes, oh, this is a good piece of content. I'll push it out to more people. So that's the number one thing that you can be doing right now is I'm working away in the background, trying to actually get the documentary made. You can be laying the groundwork so that when this documentary launches, it just goes like wildfire. So that would be the number one thing that I would really appreciate from each and every one of you. Thank you so much for your company tonight. I'm going to call it a night and get some sleep. I need some sleep. All right, guys. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.